Hey everybody. In this section, we're going to go over access to funding. Um, in the last chapter, we focused a lot more on the concept of trust. Again, to remind you, trust, value, and funding are the three core pillars of sales. In funding, this is more of an objective concept that you, as a salesperson, that needs to uncover this during the process. And there's kind of an art to it, right? Meaning on the first touch point with a prospect, it might be kind of intrusive to be asking a lot of questions up front. So you have to kind of blend this in conversation. Some people are more receptive for you asking these questions. Some of them are kind of resistant, and you kind of got to work on a little bit more on building the trust and the value during the process. So in funding, there are three areas that you need to be cognizant of during the sales process. And if you're missing any of these concepts, you need to establish them better. Okay. So this is the first thing is the buying process is aligned. I'm going to give two examples here from a B2C business to consumer, so consumer buying a product as well as a business buying software. Um, during the uh, understanding their funding and how they procure solutions or a product, there is a process, whether it be documented or undocumented. Okay, and usually from a consumer standpoint, it's usually undocumented. It's not a written process, but you still have to identify that. Budget. You need to make sure that whatever you're selling, there has to be a budget aligned to your offering. Okay. If a business is looking to procure a software product because their fiscal year is ending next month and it doesn't align what your product is align what they need to your offering, that budget's going to go elsewhere or it's not going to be exhausted. So you have to make sure that the budget is aligned to your offering. You need to be asking those right questions to figure that out. And also decision makers are aligned. Um, This can be sometimes hidden up front, and you have to ask specific questions. Again, I'm going to give two examples here. And you might find out that there's additional decision makers outside of the ones that are presented in front of you. So let's just rewind here real quick. If you worked for a car dealership and a prospect were to walk into the dealership, you start building rapport and you find out that there's a specific vehicle that they are interested in purchasing. They've done their research. They've told you that the car fits very well in the climate that it's going to be driven in. If it's if it's snowy or cold climate, they've done all that research, right? Now, as you're going, through the motions of speaking with that individual, you can go ahead and kind of figure out from them, what's that process of selecting or purchasing this vehicle, right? Because it sounds like you're really invested in it, and I'm just curious to know why you haven't moved forward with purchasing. Well, if they were to tell you that they would need some time to think about it, you can challenge the thing. You have to be comfortable is challenging what people say to you. Well, you just told me you did all that research. I don't understand why you would be holding off on it. Well, I need a little bit more time to understand, if I can afford this vehicle, this car. Well, I gave you the price. Does that fit into your budget? It's a little higher than what I'm looking at. So they're peeling back the layers. They're trying to give you, or they're starting to give you an understanding of their process, right? Now, you've heard that the budget might be a challenge here, but we're focusing on process here. Okay, now you as a salesperson could go ahead and ask, it's like, listen, most people that purchase a vehicle, they might have somebody else that influences the purchase. Is there anybody like in the family that needs to kind of give you the thumbs up or confirm that this is the right car for you? Yeah, my significant other, my wife, she's part of the process, but she said yes to this. Okay, so she's already come and see the vehicle. She's already kind of test drove it. No, she hasn't. I brought it up to her yesterday, and she said, to go ahead and check it out. And she said it looks nice. Okay, so now the process is you're unlocking that information, right? The process as you're seeing is that you need to have access to budget for that person, or they need to get access to budget to procure it. And there's a significant other that's part of that process. If they say no, that likely is not going to move forward. Anybody else? Yeah, I mean, we have a 1-year-old. They're not going to really come in here and give us a yes or no. It's like, well, are they going to be in the car often? It's like, yeah, we're going to use a car to drive them to school. Okay, that process. So now you're adding decision makers that are important to this, right? If the car seat doesn't fit in the car, for example, and the car doesn't can't make enough room for that person, that is a huge influencer. It's not said easily up front. You guys can be joking around up front or at the time, but if they are not, if that's not addressed, these decision makers are not addressed, that can really kill your deal, right? So now you understand as far as there's a budget that needs to be access to the to procure this vehicle, as well as there's decision makers. There's three of them, right? Actually four if the bank is involved, right? So moving forward, budget is aligned to your offering. If that person were to come in and say, say, hey, I need to get approved for this vehicle. We can go a little bit more into financing. Um, but you find out, and we're kind of shifting the kind of persona here, is that the person's looking for a vehicle, but it turns out that they really want to go, they want to buy a motorcycle, them and their wife, to go, across country on. But maybe that's just their mindset, and they kind of, hey, we're really into a bike, but I just wanted to see if there was a car in here that I'd be interested in. Well, they have budget, right? I'm changing the persona here. They have budget, but what they're looking for is a vehicle specific to something that's not what you offer or may not be in the section that you offer. So you need to ask these questions, uncover that, ask them, the questions that might then throw them a little off guard. But the worst thing that you can do as a salesperson is being committed to a deal that has been dead on arrival. Get comfortable in identifying what to say no to. So if they sound like they really want to buy a motorcycle or a bike, them and their significant other, and they're looking at cars, unless you can kind of influence them to purchase a car and you have a really compelling story, you also have to call out that this person is not a good fit for you, at least at the moment. Also, decision makers are aligned. So in the first section, we talked about the process here. Decision makers, going back to the person that walked in, significant other needs to be involved. Their 1-year-old needs to be comfortable in the car. And also the decision maker, if they want to procure the vehicle that's a little bit more expensive out of their budget, the bank is the fourth one, right? So you have to make the decision on having that conversation and committing to that vehicle that they're interested in. That's a higher price point, which is including a fourth decision maker, which is a bank, or if it's worth them, having that conversation, saying, listen, the vehicle that you're interested in, the bells and whistles may not be that impactful. Go for the lighter one, so you don't have to get approved for funding from the bank, right? So that removes a decision maker, and that reduces friction. So your job is to identify if the prospect is aligned for your offerings, if it makes sense for you, but also reduce friction. Don't add more time and friction to your deals, because that really kills off a lot of deals. So in that scenario, that's a B2C standpoint, right? Now let's take a look at from a B2B standpoint. If you're selling software, in the first the introduction section here, I went over the idea of selling a CRM, a customer relationship manager, that most sales teams use and customer success teams use. So if your company is selling a CRM to a company that is looking to replace theirs, let's go ahead and take a look at what that would look like and how that kind of shifts to access to funding. So buying process, a company usually has a little bit more of a complex, well, not usually, more often, a complex buying cycle. Okay, so if you're talking to the sales team looking to replace their CRM, and maybe it's the first intro call or a cold call, they said, hey, yeah, we're kind of interested in it. We have, our current system's pretty buggy. It's quite expensive. Customer support's not good. Okay, how do you buy software, right? What is your process on looking at another solution? Well, the process is we usually have our sales and marketing team kind of look at what's interesting for us, and does it kind of, we have a rubric internally to see what kind of satisfies both of their needs. Okay, understood. Now, again, this is with experience. You might understand that when solution or software like this is being sold, legal teams and IT teams are part of the process. So you can go ahead and ask that. Say, hey, listen, if you guys decide on what what solution you're going to buy, who else is involved? Well, IT needs to make sure that the product is, or the product is secure, or the company we're working with has secure, SOC 1 Type 2, or whatever documentation they need. Okay, are they aware that you're researching a solution like this? They aren't. If they tell you that, right, that process right now is kind of losing its legs, right? Meaning that you need to establish that as a salesperson, saying, well, I'm just curious why you haven't shared that with them. Oh, well, it's more of a pain point on the product itself. It is becoming a bit detrimental for us, but we want to present to the IT team, once we get there. And so there's a process right there where, and going back to the third point, which we will in a moment, decision makers that influence the procurement of the solution, they're missing there. So there can easily be a conversation later on, after you've gone through the sales process and finding out the IT teams has already found a solution or they're building it in-house, and you went through 3 months of a sales cycle which could have been killed off early because IT teams are already building it out. So go ahead and find out, what's that process. It seems like they have a rubric. They shortlist a few solutions and they present it to their IT team. Once they've shortlisted 3 of them, the IT team gives a heads up, or gives a thumbs up or thumbs down, and then legal gets the final write off, right? So understand that process early is important. Do it in a way that is professional. If it's a first cold call, like, you can ask questions, but sometimes it's better to ask a few questions. Hey, do you have a budget for this? Yeah, okay, perfect. We'll show you on the demo a little bit more on our solution and how we can work with each other, right? So just kind of wean it out a little bit. Don't go too much of a questionnaire in the first call. So a budget aligns to your offering, as I mentioned a little bit ago, is if they have budget for software, but it doesn't align to a CRM, and it seems like, you talk to the salesperson and they start going over some solutions they're looking at as a company. It sounds like HR is having a big problem with their solution. Most likely that budget would probably go over to them if it's a big enough pain point over yours, and the budget is shared. Not always a scenario, but also keep cognizant of that. And decision makers are aligned. So as I mentioned, if IT and legal are kind of disconnected, that there's no, the research is is being done, they have no idea there's research being done on a CRM, or the sales team member that you're speaking to, their boss doesn't know about this. Ask those questions. If they're not aligned there, as I mentioned, you can be digging pretty deep, investing a lot of resources, even internal resources. You, solutions architect, other people that's part of your team, and you didn't screen that out well enough and saying, okay, the path to funding is not very clear, even from the get-go. I need to do a little bit more research. I need to do a little bit more influence on this process and assisting it, to make it come to fruition and making sense of the resources. You're always spending resources during the sales process. Time is usually the most common one, but sometimes, what if you go into a pilot? Sometimes I've gone in that scenario where I've done a pilot with a customer, um, thinking that we were pretty much aligned, and the chief information officer, CIO of the company, was unaware that this business unit was doing research on it. And once it was presented after the pilot was launched, they said, "Oh, we already have this in the works. We just haven't presented to you. We were waiting for the board meeting next month." So, you can't always identify all of these concepts early, but keep asking questions, being a little bit uncomfortable, discomforting in these questions you ask, because sometimes people have their wall up, but if you don't ask them, it's going to save both parties a lot of time and energy and resources. So that's an overview of funding. And yeah, I'll see you in the next chapter.